What if I told you school was not designed to educate you, but to program you? The popular story of John D. Rockefeller's philanthropy is a well-crafted lie. Today, we expose the chilling reason why your mind was the primary target of the industrial age, a secret hidden in plain sight for over a century. The public image of John D. Rockefeller was meticulously crafted, a titan of industry, the visionary behind Standard Oil, and, in his later years, the ultimate philanthropist. He was portrayed as a man who, having accumulated unimaginable wealth, sought to give back to the society that had enabled his success. His name became synonymous with grand gestures of public charity, a narrative that painted him as a benevolent father figure to the American nation, guiding its progress with a steady and generous hand. This perception was the cornerstone of a public relations masterpiece, one that would effectively mask a far more strategic and unsettling agenda for generations. In the year 1902, this narrative of generosity was solidified with the creation of the General Education Board, funded with an initial pledge of $1 million, which would soon swell to hundreds of millions. It was presented to the world as an unprecedented gift to the American people. Its stated mission was noble: to promote education without distinction of race, sex, or creed. The public lauded this move as the pinnacle of altruism, an investment in the nation's future, designed to lift up the masses and provide opportunity for all. It seemed to be the perfect legacy for a man who had conquered the world of commerce, yet a deep and troubling dissonance existed beneath this polished surface. How could the man who pioneered predatory business tactics, who was infamous for crushing his competitors with ruthless efficiency, suddenly transform into a pure altruist in the realm of education? The history of Standard Oil was not one of gentle uplift, but of hostile takeovers and monopolistic control. This glaring contradiction should have been a red flag, a signal that perhaps the motivations behind his educational funding were not as simple or as selfless as they were being portrayed to an unsuspecting and grateful public. The seed of a more cynical truth can be found in a sentiment widely attributed to Rockefeller's inner circle, a chillingly pragmatic mission statement. "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." This single idea, whether spoken aloud or merely acted upon, reframes his entire educational project. It suggests that the goal was not intellectual liberation but the creation of a human resource pool, a workforce trained just enough to be productive but not enough to question the system in which they were cogs. This was not about building minds, it was about building a more efficient and profitable industrial machine. To fully grasp this, one must understand the context of the era. The turn of the 20th century was a period of explosive industrial expansion. Factories, mines, and railroads were hungry for an endless supply of human labor. The nation was shifting from an agrarian society of independent farmers and artisans to an urbanized, industrial powerhouse. This new paradigm required a fundamentally different kind of citizen, one who was punctual, obedient, and content with performing repetitive tasks for hours on end. The existing educational model simply did not produce this type of person, and for the titans of industry, this was a significant problem. So, the critical question we must ask is this: what if the General Education Board was never a gift at all? What if it was, in fact, a strategic weapon, a tool of social engineering deployed with calculated precision? What if its true purpose was not to enlighten, but to standardize, to pacify, and to mold the American mind into the perfect shape required by the burgeoning corporate state? This line of inquiry leads us away from the sanitized pages of official history and into the far darker, unwritten chapters of how our modern world was truly constructed. Before this industrial intervention, the American educational landscape was profoundly different. It was largely decentralized and diverse, with a strong emphasis on a classical curriculum rooted in the humanities, philosophy, history, and rhetoric. The goal was not to prepare a student for a specific job, but to cultivate a well-rounded intellect, to teach them how to think, how to argue, and how to learn for themselves. This approach was designed to foster mental discipline and moral reasoning, creating a foundation for a lifetime of independent thought and civic engagement rather than mere vocational proficiency. As a result, literacy rates and the capacity for critical thought in the early American Republic were remarkably high, geared toward producing citizens capable of understanding complex texts like the Federalist Papers. Education was about intellectual sovereignty. It aimed to create individuals who were self-reliant, resourceful, and deeply skeptical of centralized authority, whether that authority came from a distant government or a powerful corporation. These were not the traits of a compliant workforce. They were the traits of a free and often fiercely independent people who valued their autonomy above all else. This system, which celebrated the independent mind, produced a citizenry of entrepreneurs, innovators, and thinkers. It yielded individuals who were more likely to start their own businesses than to seek lifelong employment in someone else's factory. They were educated to be masters of their own destiny, not cogs in a larger economic engine. This mindset was the very bedrock of the American experiment, but it was also a direct and potent threat to the vision of men like Rockefeller, whose empires depended on a vast and predictable supply of manageable labor. From the perspective of an industrial magnate, a nation of independent critical thinkers is a logistical nightmare. People who question orders, who innovate beyond their prescribed roles, and who might one day become competitors, do not fit neatly onto an assembly line. They disrupt the top-down hierarchical structure necessary for mass production. The educational system that had served the Republic so well was therefore seen as a fundamental obstacle to the new industrial order. It was producing the wrong kind of human product for the needs of the market. This is the crucial turning point. The existing form of American education had to be framed as the problem that the philanthropists of the industrial age needed to solve. It was too chaotic, too inconsistent, and, most dangerously, too effective at creating individuals who were difficult to manage. The solution would require a complete demolition and rebuilding of the system's core philosophy, replacing the goal of intellectual freedom with a new, unstated goal of social and economic utility as defined by the industrialists themselves. The blueprint for this new system was not an American invention. It was imported from 18th century Prussia. The Prussian education system was not conceived in the spirit of enlightenment. It was forged in the crucible of military necessity. Its explicit purpose was to create obedient soldiers and loyal state bureaucrats. It was the world's first truly modern, state-mandated schooling system, and its primary outputs were conformity and deference to authority. It was, from its very inception, an instrument of state control designed to unify the populace under a single ideology. Its methodology was built upon three unshakable pillars that would become hauntingly familiar to future generations of students worldwide. First was compulsory attendance, ensuring that every child was brought into the system. Second was a stat-issued standardized curriculum, which dictated not only what students learned but also what they did not learn, effectively controlling the flow of information. Third, and most important, was the inculcation of unquestioning obedience to the authority of the teacher, who was a proxy for the authority of the state itself. This model was ruthlessly effective at its intended purpose, suppressing the individual will in favor of the needs of the collective, as defined by the ruling class. It taught children to obey bells, to follow instructions without question, and to see themselves as components of a larger entity rather than as sovereign individuals. It was a system designed to manufacture predictability and compliance on a national scale. The individual's passions, curiosities, and unique talents were irrelevant, and often inconvenient, to the overarching goals of the state. American industrialists, visiting Europe in the late 19th century, looked upon the Prussian model with immense admiration. They saw in it a perfect solution to their labor problem. Here was a proven method for molding a population into a docile, efficient, and stratified workforce. They saw the factory-like efficiency of the schools, the deference of the students, and the orderly society it produced. They did not see a tool of oppression. They saw a brilliant system for social management that could be adapted for corporate, rather than military ends. This intellectual importation became the forbidden secret at the heart of our modern school system. We were told that our schools were built to foster democracy and individual opportunity, but their underlying architecture was taken directly from a system designed for autocracy and social control. The American school was not an evolution of the early republic's classical academies. It was a hostile takeover, replacing a system of liberation with a system of indoctrination, cleverly disguised as progress and philanthropy. The General Education Board did not operate as a passive checkbook, handing out funds and hoping for the best. It was a highly proactive agent of change, wielding its immense financial power as a lever to reshape the entire educational landscape to its liking. It functioned less like a charity and more like a venture capital firm, investing in and scaling up a very specific educational product. Its leaders had a clear vision, and they used their resources with surgical precision to ensure that vision became a reality across the nation. Its primary tactic was strategic funding. The board would identify universities, colleges, and school boards that were willing to adopt its preferred methods and curriculum. These institutions would be showered with grants, allowing them to expand, build new facilities, and increase their prestige. This created a powerful incentive for other institutions to follow suit. The message was clear: conform to the new model and you will be rewarded. Resist, and you will be left behind in a state of financial struggle. This led to a process of financial strangulation for those who clung to old, more classical models of education. Institutions that prized the humanities over vocational training or that resisted moved toward standardization found their funding sources drying up. They were unable to compete with the new well-funded Rockefeller-approved schools. Over time, many were forced to either abandon their principles or close their doors entirely. It was a quiet, bloodless revolution, fought not on a battlefield but in the ledger books of university trustees. The vision for this new education was explicitly articulated by Rockefeller's closest advisor, a Baptist minister named Frederick T. Gates. He wrote in 1913 that in their new dream of education, people would yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. He envisioned a world where the school would teach students to do what they were supposed to do, unbothered by thoughts or ambitions that might distract them from their designated place in the social and economic order. It was a stark and unapologetic blueprint for social conditioning. To achieve this, the General Education Board funded the creation of new textbooks and curricula designed to promote an industrialist worldview. History was rewritten to celebrate captains of industry and to present the corporate model as the pinnacle of human achievement. Subjects like civics were subtly altered to emphasize compliance and duty over individual rights and skepticism of power. The very materials placed in children's hands were redesigned to shape their fundamental assumptions about the world and their role within it. In essence, the General Education Board was the perfect vehicle for a corporate takeover of American education. It used the respectable cloak of philanthropy to hide a ruthless agenda of social engineering. By controlling the funding, it could control the curriculum. By controlling the curriculum, it could control the thoughts of future generations. It was a long-term investment, not in the intellectual wealth of the nation, but in the creation of a permanent and compliant labor force for its industrial empire. This new educational philosophy immediately declared a covert war on critical thought. The most significant casualties were the subjects that teach one how to think, rather than what to think. The humanities, classical literature, philosophy, rhetoric, and the arts were systematically defunded and marginalized. They were deemed impractical for the needs of the industrial age. These were the very disciplines that cultivate introspection, moral reasoning, and the ability to construct and deconstruct complex argument skills that are essential for a free citizen but dangerous in a compliant worker. In their place, the system championed vocational training and narrow specialization. The goal was to prepare students for a specific job, to make them useful to an employer from the moment they graduated. While this has a surface-level practicality, its deeper effect is to limit a person's perspective. A specialist understands their own small piece of the machine intimately, but often has no comprehension of the machine as a whole. This intellectual compartmentalization prevents workers from seeing the bigger picture or questioning the system they are in. History itself became a tool of this new order. The narratives taught in schools were carefully curated to serve an industrialist agenda. Stories of labor unrest, populist revolts, and anti-corporate movements were minimized or omitted entirely. Instead, history was presented as a triumphal march of progress led by great industrialists. This created a cultural bias that favored capital and management while fostering suspicion toward organized labor and collective action from the bottom up, embedding a pro-corporate mindset in the national psyche. To measure the success of this new system, a new tool was required: the standardized test. These tests were not designed to measure genuine intelligence, creativity, or a deep understanding of a subject. They were designed to measure the ability to memorize facts, follow instructions, and conform to a predetermined set of answers. They rewarded compliance and punished divergent thinking. The student who could efficiently regurgitate the approved information was labeled smart, while the creative, questioning student was often labeled a problem. These changes should not be viewed as the natural, inevitable evolution of education. There were deliberate amputations, carefully performed to remove the parts of the learning process that fostered independence and critical inquiry. The goal was to streamline the production of human resources, and any element of the curriculum that did not serve this primary function was deemed superfluous and was cut away. The result was a system that became increasingly efficient at processing students but increasingly poor at truly educating them. The ultimate outcome, after several generations, was the creation of a population that knew very well how to perform specific tasks, but had largely forgotten how to ask profound questions. People were trained in the how of their jobs but were actively discouraged from asking why things were the way they were. This intellectual passivity was not an accident. It was the intended result. A populace that does not ask why is a populace that is easy to govern, easy to manage, and easy to lead into any future the ruling class designs for them. The programming went even deeper than the academic curriculum. It was embedded in the very structure and rhythm of the school day. This hidden curriculum was perhaps the most powerful tool of all for instilling the values of the industrial workplace. It was a form of conditioning that operated on a subconscious level, shaping behavior and assumptions without ever being explicitly taught. Its lessons were not in books, but in the environment itself, an environment meticulously designed for submission. Consider the school bell. From a young age, children are trained to respond to this arbitrary, external signal. The bell tells them when to start working, when to stop, when to move, when to eat, and when to speak. Their own internal rhythms of curiosity, focus, and creativity are completely ignored and overridden. This is perfect training for the factory floor or the corporate office, where the clock, not one's own passion or interest, dictates the entirety of the day's activities. It teaches a fundamental lesson: your time is not your own. Knowledge itself was broken down into discrete, disconnected subjects. History was taught at 9 in the morning, math at 10, and science at 11, with no attempt to show how these fields are deeply interconnected. This compartmentalization discourages holistic, interdisciplinary thinking. It teaches students to see the world in fragments, preventing them from synthesizing information to form a coherent, big-picture understanding. A fragmented worldview is easier to manage than a holistic one, as it prevents people from connecting the dots of power and influence in their society. The physical layout of the traditional classroom is an architecture of passive reception. Students are seated in rigid rows, all facing a single point of authority at the front of the room. This arrangement physically discourages peer-to-peer collaboration, discussion, and debate. It positions learning as a one-way transfer of information from the expert teacher to the empty vessel of the student. It is a model designed for the efficient delivery of approved data, not for the co-creation of knowledge or the cultivation of critical dialogue. This entire environment is one of constant surveillance and judgment. Students are perpetually graded, ranked, and sorted. They learn to perform for the approval of the authority figure, to seek external validation in the form of grades rather than internal satisfaction from genuine understanding. The system of rewards for compliance and punishments for deviation trains them to conform their behavior to the expectations of others. It teaches them to fear failure and to avoid taking the intellectual risks that are essential for true innovation and discovery. When you assemble all these pieces, it becomes clear that the most important lesson taught in school is not reading, writing, or arithmetic. It is submission. It is a multi-year intensive training program in how to follow orders, how to accept external authority without question, and how to perform assigned tasks in exchange for rewards. This was the hidden curriculum's ultimate goal, to precondition the youth of the nation for a lifetime of docility within the corporate and governmental structures that the industrialists were building. The scope of Rockefeller's vision extended far beyond the schoolhouse. It aimed to reshape the very foundations of American society, including its approach to health and medicine. He understood that controlling the body was just as important as controlling the mind. To this end, his foundation, along with that of his industrialist ally Andrew Carnegie, financed a project that would forever change the practice of medicine in the United States and consolidate its control in the hands of a select few. This project was called the Flexner Report. Published in the year 1910, the Flexner Report was presented as an objective scientific survey of medical education in America. Its author, Abraham Flexner, toured the country's 155 medical schools and issued a scathing critique of most of them. He championed a single narrow model of medicine, one that was university-based, research-oriented, and heavily reliant on pharmaceutical drugs for treatment. This was presented as the gold standard against which all other forms of medicine should be judged. The report's impact was immediate and devastating. It systematically discredited any medical school that focused on alternative, holistic, or nature-based practices like homeopathy, naturopathy, and herbal medicine. Armed with the report's scientific authority, state licensing boards, heavily influenced by organizations funded by the industrialists, began to shut down these competing schools by the hundreds. Within a few short years, the rich diversity of medical thought in America was decimated, leaving only one officially sanctioned model. This was no coincidence. The model of medicine that the Flexner Report endorsed was one that relied heavily on patented, synthesized drugs. These drugs were derived from petroleum, the very source of John D. Rockefeller's immense wealth. By eliminating the competition, he and his allies ensured that the medical pharmaceutical complex, which was dependent on their petrochemical products, would hold a complete and highly profitable monopoly over the nation's healthcare system for the next century. This was a masterful strategic move, mirroring the one made in education. First, you use the veneer of philanthropy and scientific progress to create a standard. Then, you use that standard to discredit and eliminate all competition. Finally, you create a system where the population becomes dependent on your products, whether those products are for their minds or for their bodies. It was a holistic plan for control, ensuring that citizens would rely on industrialist-approved institutions from the classroom to the hospital. Thus, the war on intellectual self-sufficiency in schools was paired with a war on physical self-sufficiency in health. The knowledge of natural remedies and preventative wellness, once common, was ridiculed as unscientific quackery. People were taught to distrust their own bodies and the healing power of nature, and instead to place their faith entirely in the hands of a new class of professional doctors who in turn placed their faith in the pharmaceutical products that flowed from the industrialists' factories. It is crucial to understand that this vast project of social re-engineering was not the work of a single man. John D. Rockefeller was arguably its most powerful and influential architect, but he was not acting alone. He was part of a cohort of immensely wealthy industrialists who shared a common vision and a common set of problems. Their solution was a coordinated multi-generational effort to reshape American society from the ground up, using their tax-exempt foundations as the primary tools. The Carnegie Corporation and the Ford Foundation, among others, worked in concert with the Rockefeller Foundations. Their goals were perfectly aligned because their business needs were identical. Andrew Carnegie needed disciplined workers for his steel mills. Henry Ford required men who could endure the crushing monotony of the assembly line. All of them needed a population that was trained to consume, to obey, and to view corporate employment as the highest and most stable form of aspiration. The evidence of this coordinated effort is not hidden. The minutes from the early meetings of these foundations reveal a clear intent to use education as a means of social control. The Reese Committee, a congressional investigation in the 1950s, uncovered documents showing that these foundations were actively working to alter American society toward a collectivist model that would be more compatible with their global corporate interests, a process that began decades earlier. This corporate influence on public policy did not go unnoticed at the time. As early as 1914, the National Education Association, then an organization of teachers and administrators, expressed grave concerns. They warned that a powerful, private, and perpetual corporation was attempting to dictate the course of public education in America, shaping it to serve its own ends rather than the public good. Their warnings, however, were drowned out by the immense financial and political power of the foundations. What was occurring was a quiet, insidious revolution. The industrialists realized that they did not need to seize political power through force. They could simply purchase it by funding and controlling the institutions that shaped the minds of the nation, that were replacing the democratic ideal of a society governed by informed citizens with a new model, a corporatocracy managed by experts, where the general population was trained to be passive spectators and productive employees. The school became the primary training ground for this new corporatocracy. It was the bottling plant for the human mind, where the raw potential of childhood was processed, standardized, and packaged to fit the specific needs of the industrial machine. It was a conspiracy not of secret societies meeting in smoke-filled rooms, but of shared interests among a powerful class of men who had the resources to remake the world in their own image, and who understood that the most effective form of control is the one that is never even perceived by the controlled. The architecture of control I have revealed is not just history. It lives in our assumptions, our ambitions, and our fears. The true Rockefeller legacy is not etched in stone, but in the neural pathways of generations. But now that you know the blueprint, you have a choice. You can continue to walk the halls that were built for you, or you can tear down the walls and draw your own map. If this video opened your mind, share it so others can see the bars. Subscribe for more deep dives into the history they never taught you. And most importantly, comment below. What was the first hidden lesson you realized school had taught you? Let's start the conversation they never wanted us to have.